Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. And also check out our Patreon page. I'll put a link below. On Patreon, you're going to get the ability to get exclusive content, reviews that haven't been released yet, and also a discount code for 15% off of everything in our online web store. Hi, I'm Mike, owner of the In Groove in Phoenix, Arizona. Today I'm going to do a comparison of the Smashing Pumpkins album, Mellon, Collie, and the Infinite Sadness. Now this is actually going to be a relatively quick review because really there's only two versions of this album. 3-ish, 4-ish if you count a repress, but not really. This is the first pressing. The first pressing is numbered. This album has been heavily counterfeited, so you got to be careful of that. For some reason, the counterfeit doesn't include the white box, the thing that you probably would assume would be the easiest thing to put into a counterfeit. Okay, so the original white box, they're numbered. That's the original UK pressing of this album. They did a reissue of it, which uses the exact same metalwork, so the lacquers were the same. Stampers, mother, father, all that was the same. So the sound quality between the original and the reissue is the exact same thing. So if you're only looking to hear the way the original sounds, you really don't need to spend the money on the numbered version. You can get away with the reissue, no problem. The album was butchered up a little bit on vinyl when it first came out. The running order was changed. This was common in the 90s. 90s vinyl in general was made as an afterthought. You know, there wasn't a lot of effort put into it. This album properly should have been on 4 discs when it originally came out, but to keep costs down, it was already expensive as a 3-disc set. To keep costs down, they kind of rearranged the order, track order on this, and put it on 3 discs. So it's a little hacked up from what you would, you know, if you're used to listening to the running order on the CD, that's not on the vinyl record. They did a few things that were kind of interesting to it. They kind of broke it up into dawn, tea time, dusk, twilight, midnight, and starlight on 3 discs. And then the album itself, you know, it doesn't actually tell you what's on it. It just says tea time and then there's some numbers. So if you want to look at the track order, you really got to go to the back of the record and kind of match it up. The sound quality on this is actually not that good. So this is something that is very, very common with 90s albums. Why are 90s albums so expensive? Because they're rare. They're collectible, but they don't necessarily sound that good. This album, like a lot of albums from that era, what they essentially did was to smash it onto more vinyl. Not only did they cut up the running order and swap it around to save space on the record, the absolute best way you could save space on the record is to essentially compress the lower end of the music. Bass takes up more space on a vinyl record than any other frequency in the range. You get a record that is very heavy on bass, you got more modulation to the groove. More modulation in the groove takes up more space. So one of the ways you can get more music on a side of vinyl is you can essentially whack off that lower bass. Take off that lower bass, almost like a compression. If you smash down and take more of just the mid-range frequencies of the music, you can get more music on the record. And that's kind of what they did with this. So cool, iconic, collectible, rare as can be. Yeah. Would I get rid of it? No. But it is actually not the best sounding record you can get. This album, the reason I did this review, actually one of my Patreon members asked me, you know, and off the top of my head I said to myself, well, I'm pretty sure the box sounded pretty good, but it's been so long since I've actually listened to the album, I went back and that's the reason for this particular video. This is the box set that came out in 2012, and then they also kind of redid it in 2014-15, and they didn't tell anybody. And the reason being is the original of this was cut a lot hotter, and because it used more of the dead wax, there was inner groove distortion on some of the records if you played it on a cheaper turntable. Zero is the main culprit. If you played the original 2012 box, now this is the 2014, but I had the original 2012 box, and I have a really high-end turntable. High-end turntable, I never noticed any inner groove distortion on the box, or on the track Zero. But it was a big issue for a lot of people. So what they did is they essentially recut the record, and they lowered the volume probably a couple of dB. That essentially, like I talked about in the first album, allowed them to push the record more towards, away from the groove, away from the label. It's not cut as hot, but because of that, you don't get the inner groove distortion. A turntable has the most difficult time tracking the innermost grooves. So you spend big money on a good cartridge, big money on a good table, you've got less of an issue with tracking those inner grooves. If you got a lower price table, you're gonna have more of an issue. But besides that, this is done properly. They use the proper CD running order on this. They also put it on 4 discs, which it should have been originally. When you do that, again, you've got more vinyl on each side, and you'll notice on this versus the other one, the original pressing, well, first off, they put the tracks on the record, which is nice. But for the most part, you've got 3 to 4 songs. That side H has 3 songs. Side G has 4 songs. So there's less music on each side. There is more flipping to do to listen to this record. But this is the way that it should have been released originally. But to save on cost, they didn't do that. But because there's more space dedicated towards the actual music, they're able to cut the album with more dynamic range. More dynamic range in this case leads to much deeper low-end frequencies, much better high-end frequencies. And you got to also think both of these albums were originally digital. They were cut digitally. So it's not like you're getting the benefit of an analog original versus a modern digital reissue. They're both digital reissues. When it comes to vinyl, you're going to see less compression than you ever will in the digital domain. You can't properly compress and cut to vinyl like you can on CD. But CDs or digital, you can compress until you have, a DR rating of 2. On vinyl, you have to, in order to properly cut it, you can only compress so much, and then it becomes uncuttable. So this is actually really, really good. Now, there's a European version of the 2014. There's a US version. I've had both. You're really splitting hairs at that point. The 2012, off of memory, some sides were cut a little hotter, but did it sound better? No. So I think safely go with the 2014. There's a US and a European release. It's a box set. It's not going to be cheap to import this from Europe. It's not going to be cheap to import the US box set into Europe. So I would just go with this particular record. I would just go with whatever your country, where you're at. Get that box set, whether it's the US or the European pressing. This box set is really the way to do it. Now, at the time of making this video, this box seems to be sold out everywhere, but this has been kind of an on again, off again for the last couple of years. I do believe currently it's still in print. I wouldn't pay the $140, $150 it's going for at the moment. I would wait until you find it. I just got a batch of these in a couple months ago. They sold out. Now we're waiting on some more. But this is about a $100 retail box set at the moment. The original numbered versions, you could pay $400 or $500 for that record. But this is much better sounding. This is a better modern digital issue. And I mean, it's a box set. It's got some cool things, cool artwork. It's got a nice book. So I mean, you got a lot more bang for the buck when it comes to this versus the original. But I would go with the box set. It sounds better. It's significantly more forceful, especially in the drum sound. That kick drum and the snare drum just has more life, more air to it. That's one of the cool things about the Pumpkins is I love their dynamic range that they implemented in the music. You would hear Billy singing and you would have this nice drum backbeat overlaid in the music, and and then it would get loud, and then it's one of those things that you hear more of on the modern reissue. It's texture, the texture of the music is much better on the box set. But, this was actually a pretty easy review. There was only really 2 albums to look for. Again, there's a lot of counterfeits. The counterfeits are more than likely just taken from the original CD. So, no sense in buying a counterfeit. Really, it's, do you want the reissue, European US pressing, or do you want the original European pressing or the reissue that came out, the non-numbered version of it? It's really the only options there are at this moment. Go with the box set. Sounds better, it's cheaper, it's semi-in print, about 1/3 or 1/4 the price. All right, guys, that's all I got. Until next time.